world's top universities. And I was privileged to be one of the senior leaders in that institution, and the first Indian in its history, by the way. And I was hired in a worldwide, thank you. I was hired in a worldwide recruiting process, but I decided to come back because I wanted to be back in the US. And starting in January, I have been invited to come back to my alma mater, Stanford University, which is where Silicon Valley starts from. I've been invited to come back and be a fellow at a university-wide institute called the Distinguished Careers Institute. The name is a little pompous, but they invite 25 people from all over the world to come and spend a year or two doing anything they want. So next year I'll be at Stanford again. After I left from there, 33 years later, I'm going back to California again. So Raj's email to me, I asked him, so what should I speak about? And I'm going to quote him. He says very nice things about my background, and then I'm sure there are still many chapters to be written. We would very much enjoy hearing about your life's journey, where it started and how you got to where you are now. What were the highs, the lows, the challenges, the success, the failure, what inspired you, who inspired you, what was the motivation, how did you find your passion, what was your breakthrough moment, and how did being a Rajput have an influence on you? And please do that in 40 minutes. So I will do my best, and I hope you will not be disappointed. I've jotted down some thoughts, and in fact, Raj and Sadhna and all you wonderful Rana delegates, this is happening for me at a particularly opportune time. So I've actually enjoyed thinking about, so what am I going to say? I'm a very devout, very staunch Hindu, but in a particular sense. I think some of you may enjoy this. I have studied the Shastras quite deeply, even though I was privileged to be part of the very high quality public school education system, which are really the elite private schools of India, and received the best of what India had to offer. Then I received the best of what America had to offer. And in the last few years, I would say for the last 10 years or so, I found myself going back very deeply into the roots of the Hindu tradition. And I make the distinction, as I think about it, between Hinduism as a religion and the Hindu spiritual tradition. Nothing against religion. I'm a very deep believer in rituals and have had the great privilege of doing them for many of my ancestors. It's very poignant, actually, that in my family of origin, I'm the youngest and the last surviving male. All the elders have passed on. Technically, if I want, I can actually use the title Thakur now. But this was for my father, so I'm not going to use it, at least not yet. Maybe in another 10 or 20 years, I'll feel comfortable enough. But what I've found is much more deeply than the religion. I found my identity being shaped by actually the Hindu spiritual tradition. And it's interesting, I'm a lifelong student of history, particularly Indian history, and I would say to you that in many ways, this is just a personal opinion, in many ways, literally the last 1,000 years before 1991 have been a period of decline of Indian civilization, particularly Hindu civilization. It was so remarkable. On 1st of January 2000, I found myself at the Somnath temple in Saurashtra, your area. I was at the Somnath temple, and as the sun was setting behind on the western side in the Arabian Sea, the thought occurred to me that this is the same place where symbolically the 1,000-year decline of India started. 1026, I think, or 1028, Mahmud of Ghazni sacked finally the Somnath temple like the 17th time. And Indian civilization went into decline particularly Hindu civilization. Interestingly, if you go into the roots of the Hindu spiritual tradition, while there have been developments in the last 1,000 years, in fact, the real anchors are from the previous millennium. It culminates with the work of Adi Shankara, who is in, whichever century it was, 7th century, 8th century. So my anchors of my identity are actually in that first millennium Hinduism, the spiritual tradition. And if you have not studied it, I would urge you very strongly, go back and read the classics. There is very, very deep truth in that tradition. That's where I'm coming from. Let me just say a few words. I put my timer on. I'll try to stay with my time if I can. And of course, my phone is turned off. But I thought by way of giving you background, where am I coming from? I told you about the religious versus the spiritual. In all complete candor, I would tell you, while I still have many good years ahead of me, I was very privileged that my father lived till age 103. And in fact, till he was 102, he was just fine. And the best, I know there are medical doctors and scientists here, the best evidence that we have on the determinants of longevity. There's a very famous nurses study from Massachusetts, as I recall. The best predictor is, did you have at least one parent who lived to a ripe old age? You take everything else, every other explanation, nothing matters as much. What matters is what are your genes. You can make a mess of it. If you start smoking and you start drinking and doing drugs, you'll just die faster. But what really matters is what are the genes that you're carrying. So I'm very privileged not only to be part of the glorious Rajput tradition. I come from a family where my mother, God bless her, is going to be 88 in 1 month's time, and she's doing okay, as well as you can at age 88. My father lived till 103, so there are many years ahead. But I have lived a very good and enjoyable and successful life. Quite frankly, when I left India in 1978, if someone had said to me, these are the things you're going to do, I would never have believed it. But maybe similar to your life journeys, you put one foot in front of the other, and 30, 40 years later, you're in a very different place than where you started. And the journey itself is part of the adventure. It's not my purpose to say, look what a great life I have had, and I'm to be admired for that reason. Quite the contrary. In some ways, I have lived a very ordinary life. I've just tried my best. I've been very fortunate. Interestingly, I have met not only really wonderful people in India, but I have met really wonderful people also in America and across the world. Some of my main mentors have actually been white Americans. There are wonderful people everywhere. I'm not a great believer in giving advice. Everyone's life circumstances, particularly young people, might look at me and say, we might find something interesting here. That's fine. I'm not here to give advice to anyone. I'm just here to tell the story of my life, what were some of the main events, and of course, I'll answer Raj's extremely complicated question while I'm doing this. That's where I'm coming from. I'm a lifelong academic, so please bear with me if I lapse into a little bit of academic jargon or concepts, because that's what my life has been about. There's a very famous psychologist at Stanford whose name is Albert Bandura. He's recently retired, and he wrote a very seminal paper called The Psychology of Chance Encounters. If you were to go and Google it, I'm sure you'll find it on the internet. What does he say in The Psychology of Chance Encounters? Basic thesis is this: much more than we would care to recognize, our lives are governed by factors over which we have no control. Yes. This is not to say that our lives are random. It's not that we are going from pillar to post with no direction. No. There are certain turning points that happen The timing of those turning points is completely random and outside our control. And nothing could be more true of my life than this. I was studying at Lucknow University, finishing up a master's degree in physics. I'd never even heard about management. And quite by accident, one of my classmates had gone to write the entrance exam for IIM Ahmedabad, which was virtually unknown at the time. This was in 1971. And I heard about this. It seemed very interesting. And of course, I applied to the school next year and was selected and took a turn in my life and went in a completely different direction. This theme actually follows all the way through. Some of the greatest global jobs that I have got have actually been a result of these chance encounters. When I went to Singapore, this happened because one of my fellow board members, when I was on the board of Infosys Technologies, was a very prominent Singaporean, and I was visiting him in 2006. He's Singaporean Chinese, and he says, his name is Philip. He's one of the people, Philip Yeo is one of the people that have built modern Singapore. There's a handful of them, there are some 30, 40 people. He's one of them, they have built Singapore where it is today. And he says, go and meet this guy, Su Guaning. I said, who's Su Guaning? He says, oh, he's the president of NTU. I said, why? He says, they're looking for a new dean. I said, I'm not interested. No, go and meet him. So I go and meet him. 8 months later, they offer me the job and I go to Singapore. What's very interesting is my years at Stanford, there was this very shy young man who was in his MBA first year. I was doing a PhD, painfully shy. He did his first year, came back to India. It was Mukesh Ambani. He's a lifelong friend of mine because he was junior to me when we were at Stanford together. One day in the 90s, there was a Wharton India Economic Forum at Wharton, which I was one of the people that helped create that forum. There was this CEO and chairman of a information technology company who had come to Wharton. We started talking, and he says, you know, next time you come to Bangalore, you must come and visit us. That was Narayan Murthy. So if you are walking the path, you just run into people. What you do with it is very systematic and totally non-random. But how the meetings occur is quite by chance. And I would say that's a very good perspective on my life as well. Things have happened, sometimes under my control, mostly not under my control. And I've tried to, in an ethical and transparent and high integrity manner, try to make the most of them. One last example I would give is, in the mid-90s, this actually has a Rajasthan connection. Mid-90s, there's a young man who's a Wharton undergraduate. He comes to take my class, which was an MBA class, doesn't do too well in the class, and says, I really want to get a better grade. I will redo this paper. And I say, by all means, and he gets an A+ on the course. That was Lakshmi Mittal's son, Aditya Mittal, right? They are now the largest steel company in the world. In fact, I was the first person in the entire world. In 1996, Lakshmi Mittal invited me to London, and I was the first person outside his family that he talked to. And in 1996, he says, Professor Singh, my aim is to one day be the largest steel company in the world. It's possible to do that. So anyway, this is my perspective that I'm coming from. I do want to, since we have been talking about family quite a lot, I do want to talk a little bit about my family. I already spoke about my mother and father, but it's also worth saying that my mother and father were the first generation who actually moved from the village to the city. Now will come a very interesting part of the story. So our ancestors originally are from, some of you will know this town, a town across the border from Agra in western UP. On the Rajasthan side, there's a town called Karoli, very famous for a Kaila Devi Mandir. Kaila Devi is the local name for Durga Ma. And our ancestors had moved from Karoli. There was a Raja Vijay Singh of Karoli. They had moved from there and they were his descendants, and they moved into western UP. It's not a very big distance, maybe 100 miles or more. And they had moved into western UP, and both my mother and father are from around the Agra area, first generation villagers who during British times came into the city. In the early 1900s, some of you will know this as well, in Agra there is now a university called Raja Balwant Singh University. In the early 1900s, it used to be at the time Balwant Rajput College. My father was taken from the village by his nephew, who was older than him. You know how village relationships are. He was taken to BR College in Agra. Come with me. Now comes the very interesting part. My father, God bless him, as I said, lived till 1996, age 103. His nephew, my father's name was Thakur Jagram Singh. His nephew was actually Thakur Mahendra Singh. He was my cousin, basically, through the complicated family relationship. He was the father of Vijaya Raja Scindia. Her unmarried name, she's from my family, she was from my family. Her unmarried name was Lekha Divyeshwari Devi. And she was such a wonderful person. Once she became royalty, married to the Maharaja of Gwalior, she, till the end of her life, actually was connected to my family. My father was one of those very proud Rajputs who would never go, because the whole extended family would go there and say, look, our girl has become queen. They would go and ask for something. My father, to his credit, never asked either the Rajmata or before, earlier she was the Maharani, or her husband, Jivaji Rao Scindia, who died very early. Never asked them for anything. So to the end of his life, she was actually looking at him as her father. He was a father surrogate. She didn't get along well with her father, which was a long and complicated history. I don't want to get into it right now. But in 1995-96, when my father was bedridden in his last year, in fact, she came and visited him one time, and it would have been obvious to her that he was not going to live. He was bedridden, and my father, till the end of his days, would call her Lekha, not Vijaya Raja Scindia. Are Lekha, Lekha beta, aao, betho. He would talk to her. She came and she was the president of the Vishwa Hindu Parishad. She had brought a garland of roses the size of his entire body, and she put it around him lying on the bed, put her head on his feet and wept, right? Because she knew he was going to die. Until the end, before she died, my family was in touch with her and she was very close to us. So technically, she was actually my niece. Complicated relationship. So the current Chief Minister of Rajasthan, in fact her daughter, in fact is my grandniece. And Madhav Rao Scindia's son is my great-grandnephew. But we are, Lekha, their grandmother came from our side, and she maintained very good relations till she was alive. And we have never really pursued it too much. And it's fine whenever we meet them. Vasundhara Raje, if I go to Rajasthan, I'm sure I'll meet her and we'll have a good time together. But that's part of my family. The other part of my family, which concerns two good friends who I'm happy to meet here, Dr. C.B. Singh and Kumkum, whom I have known for a long time. This was a part of my family where they were both students of my cousin, Dr. R.V. Singh, who eventually retired as Vice Chancellor of Lucknow University. He was my aunt's sister's son. And so that's another part of my family. I was telling General Bhupinder Singh, we have had many admirals and generals and, air commodores, my own brothers, my cousins, my uncles, and a whole bunch of us have served in the armed forces as well, including Dinesh Singh Chauhan, Lieutenant General, head of Central Command, who I think regrettably from what I've heard passed away a couple of years ago. The final part was Shailendra Kumar Singh, who was governor of Rajasthan, and someone mentioned that he was from Nagaur. Is the gentleman here? Someone was from Nagaur. And in 2008, he invited me to come to Rajasthan and visit him. I was in Singapore at the time. And I went there and he was, of course, governor of Rajasthan. We flew in his private plane, went to Nagaur, and it was a wonderful occasion because that's the last time I wore a safa. Maharaj Gaj Singh was there. He was, because this is all part of Jodhpur's old kingdom. He was there and we all sat on the stage and he spoke Rajasthani, introduced me, and of course the governor was there, Mahamuhim S.K. Singh. And what was wonderful is he was speaking Rajasthani and I still speak fluent Western UP dialect. I could understand everything that he was saying. The language is the same. And the day was that they were putting up a new statue of Amar Singh Rathore, who was from Nagaur. And in fact, I was there when this statue was inaugurated. I could go on about my family history, but I'm going to shift gears and talk about some different things. Suffice it to say that the story of my family literally could be the plot of a Hindi movie. Both in very positive ways and unfortunately in very tragic ways. I was telling General Bhupinder Singh in 1965, my brother who unfortunately passed away in 2011, he was retired as an Air Commodore in the Indian Air Force. And in 65, he was a young man, beautiful, handsome man. He was a flying officer. He was taken prisoner of war in Pakistan. And if you remember, there was an armored column coming from Lahore, trying to cross the Chogil Canal and all. These are the guys that went and bombed it. And the armored column stopped. So it saved future battles, but in fact, he got caught and we didn't know if he was dead or alive for 3 or 4 months until we got, in November, a letter from Switzerland through the International Red Cross, where he had written that I'm okay. General Karyappa's son was also a prisoner of war. Eventually, they were returned in January 1966, and he went on to have a good career in the Air Force. Anyway, what do I want to say next? Raj asked about breakthrough moments. I think it is in the same spirit as the psychology of chance encounters. I firmly believe that when these turning points come in our lives, in the moment we frequently don't recognize what is the true potential for this to change the future. It's impossible to recognize. You can't tell. Given this Hindu spiritual tradition, particularly from the first millennium and even before that, I have come more and more to believe that, in fact, there is no such thing as good or bad. There is no such thing as enormous success or great tragedy. Everything is there before us all the time. What matters most is how do we respond to what occurs. So some of the breakthrough moments where my life has taken a turn and gone to levels which I would never have imagined actually have been responses to tragedy. In 1966, 2 weeks after my brother came back from Pakistan, my oldest brother, who was the superstar of the family, you may remember this, 1966, 7th February, I think, maybe 9th February, there was a plane that crashed Panihal Range in Kashmir, Indian Airlines plane. He was a co-pilot of that plane. He was 34 years old and he died, right? It changed my life. So that has been a breakthrough moment. I suddenly, for whatever reason, I can only now recollect or make sense after the fact of what might have happened. But suddenly I was at Kalvin Talukdar's college in Lucknow. Suddenly I was at the top of my class. I still can't tell you what happened. But that was a moment of great liberation, moment of great change in my life, moment of great tragedy in the family. Another such moment I would tell you is in 1973, when I left Lucknow University. I was studying to be a physicist. I went to IIM Ahmedabad. Nobody knew about it at the time. Today, in 2016, it is still recognized as one of the top institutions in the world. I was very fortunate that I went there. Another breakthrough moment would be in fall of 1979. I had just come to America, and I had just been offered full fellowships to study at Harvard, at Stanford, at Carnegie Mellon, at MIT, at Wharton, at Yale. This was one of the wildest dreams that I had, and it had all come true. The other thing I will tell you, I had mentioned my father, and he died in 1996. He was 103 years old. I hope you will not think this is too macabre, because again, in the deep Hindu spiritual tradition, the heart of Vedanta and the Upanishads and the Shastras, death is nothing to be feared. You're a warrior, you know what I'm talking about, you embrace death. That is the heart of the Raj tradition. So we are standing there in Lucknow by the Gomti River. My older brother, the Air Force General, is busy collecting the sandalwood. We are going to cremate my father. And this protege of my father, he was very, very prominent man. He was Cabinet Secretary of India. His name was Mr. Ramkrishna Trivedi. He eventually retired as Governor of Gujarat. I had known him as my older brother my entire life. I'm standing there totally stunned. Here's my father about to be cremated. He comes around me. I hope everyone speaks Hindi.
Yes.
I will translate if not. He comes around me and puts his, he was like 6 feet tall. He just passed away 2 years ago in Lucknow. Comes around, puts his arm around me, and he says in Hindi, "Beta, aankh khol ke dekho, daro mat." What a profound knowledge he was handing over to me. He was a pure Kanakubj Brahman. He says, "Beta, daro mat, isko puri aankh khol ke dekho." Yahi jo hai जीवन का सत्य है. This is the truth of life. Do not be afraid. Open your eyes and look. Look carefully. This is the true meaning of life. Then he goes on to say, कि जीवन में कुछ क्षण ऐसे आते हैं. There are these moments in life जब माया का पर्दा जो है खुल जाता है. When the curtains of Maya are parted and you see जो सत्य है वो तुम्हारे सामने स्पष्ट होता है. The truth will be there, revealed before you. Says, बेटा जो तुम देख रहे हो, यह वो क्षण है जिसमें विरक्ति मिलती है. इसको शमशान विरक्ति कहते हैं. Virakti this is a moment of liberation, and this was one of the most profound gifts to me. Here is this old man who is obviously himself thinking about my time is coming, and he gives this gift to me. And I tell you, all my fear of death has gone away.
That's great.
This has been one of the great gifts. Now I'm going to go into the point about the Rajput identity. This is a very complicated matter. And I've had the benefit of studying philosophy, the Hindu spiritual tradition. And I hesitate to say what I truly believe because it may offend some of you. But I will still be courageous and talk about it. But before I do that, I want to say a little bit more. What I have found fascinating is that our Raj tradition, which I am deeply influenced by, actually has echoes all over the world. I have in recent years done a lot of work in Japan. What is very interesting is the samurai tradition in Japan is exactly the same set of values. And contemporary Japanese, when I talk to them and I say, and they are so close to me, Japanese are very formal people, they are so close to me. One of them, Masataka Ota-san, as I know him, he says, "Singh-san, you are like my brother," right? I was there in 2013, in the month of August, like our Shraddh in India, Pitra Paksh. They have a similar thing in Japanese culture. And he says, "Would you come with me when I am doing Shraddh for my parents?" He took me to the cemetery. And while he was reciting mantras, which interestingly enough, he thought are in Japanese, they are all old mantras in Sanskrit actually. They sound Japanese, they're all in Sanskrit. And I recited, like Shiva's Mahamrityunjaya mantra and all. He was so thrilled. So the Japanese tradition has something called Bushido, same way of the warrior. And there is a very interesting Western movie, which if you have not seen, I would recommend. This is about the fall of Jerusalem to Saladin. It's called Kingdom of Heaven with Liam Neeson. You should see this movie, Liam Neeson, Eva Green, beautiful movie. And there is a scene in which Liam Neeson is dying and he's going to anoint his son as Count Balian, and he's going to go to Jerusalem to save the Holy Land. And here is what Liam Neeson in that last scene before he dies says to his son, kneel before me, because he's going to make a knight out of him. Kneel before me, and then he slaps his face. And he says, have no fear, speak the truth, protect the weak. And that slap was to remind you of your humility so that you would follow in God's path and learn how to love. That is the path of the warrior. So I would say to you, I grew up in a very proud Rajput family, very, very accomplished people like my cousin Dr. R.V. Singh, like my niece, my late departed niece, Rajmata Vijayaraja Scindia, and many others, generals, admirals, high-ranking Air Force officers. And yet, I would tell you, this is now the complicated part, and we don't have time to really go into all the details. While I am still extremely proud of my Rajput identity, one of the things I began to discover over the years is, at least in my personal journey, there was the need to go beyond the Rajput identity. While it is still a defining feature of who I am, so in fact this protect the weak, speak the truth, even in my business school dean's jobs in Singapore and in Hong Kong, this is exactly what I do. No one needs to protect the strong. You need to protect the weak. People in power will do all kinds of crazy things. Someone has to stand up and speak for the right thing, right? This doesn't always make me a popular person, but it's the right thing to do. So what is interesting is I have found there are different layers of my own identity. And what I have gone to more and more, while a piece of my identity is still very much that of a Rajput, I think the deepest core of my identity, in fact, is that of a Hindu. And there is no contradiction between them. It's the Rajput part is just the Kshatriya, the warrior part. The deeper anchor is really deeply in Hinduism. And in a sense, there is an opportunity, I think, to be a little kinder to oneself in the Hindu identity. The identity of the warrior at the end of the day, this is my take on it, the identity of the warrior at the end of the day is you are basically primarily an instrument. You know what I'm talking about. If your king in the old days or your prime minister or president today says, go and do this, you basically don't ask any questions. That's who you are. You go, and if necessary, if you're a soldier, you die. Of course, there is a level of commitment to a higher ideal that is required. There is also a level of self-sacrifice that is required. Also a level of completely putting aside your own needs as a human being, as a soul. This is a supreme level of sacrifice. This is not needed. While I have the identity of a warrior that's part of who I am, this is not what's needed with me. And instead of fighting like the general here with guns and with swords and bullets, I fight with words, which you are doing as well now. So I have been more comfortable falling back into my own roots, into our roots of a Hindu identity. That has been my way of resolving this. The issues are there. If you think deep enough, if you look deep enough into your own heart, the issues are there. They have been there for thousands of years. philosophers were talking about this in 1000 BC, they'll be talking about it long after we are gone. The point I'm making is each one of us has to come up with a synthesis and say, this is where I am today, and I've shared some of my synthesis with you. Two last points and then I'll stop, take some questions. One is, what have I learned? I thought this might be of some interest to you. And the last is sort of, where am I going from here? Let me just share some thoughts with you. What have I learned? Some of this may be surprising to you. Actually, brilliance is cheap. Lots of brilliant people. It's partly a problem of the career track I've been on, the universities I've been at, the best in the world by this is my great good fortune. Everyone is brilliant. What really sets you apart is how much are you willing to work hard. And brilliance is cheap. There are lots of brilliant people. The people who end up making a difference are the ones who also work hard. And what is truly different is you have to lead a life of integrity. I've been on the boards of major companies. I've had access to insider information. The temptation was always there. Go and do something. Trade on this insider information. Integrity really, in my way of thinking about it, is what do you do in the dark of night when nobody is looking? That'll define who you are. No one else may know, but you will always know. God will always know what you have done. And you will have to deal with the consequences. I've seen the world. I've been extremely fortunate. I've now lived in, worked in, lectured in, taught in, consulted in, I think, 65 countries all over the world. And you know, there is good and evil everywhere. And by the way, these are the core foundations of Vedanta as well, of the Hindu spiritual tradition. Good and evil is everywhere, and they're the same thing. They're two sides of the same coin. The world, as the Tibetans, the Buddhists call it, this is old Hindu thinking. This is samsara. The Buddha talked about this. The Buddha was a Kshatriya, Rajput, like us. The world is samsara, and basically there's everything there. What matters is, what are you going to choose to do when your turn comes? I believe very much in the importance of karma. I believe very much in prarabdha. Now this is an audience of fairly like-minded Hindus and Rajputs like me, so I will tell you this. I am also actually a follower of the path of Kriya Yoga. I've been doing it for some years now. Paramahansa Yogananda was one of the last realized masters. So I learned from his students. And doing Kriya Yoga has actually changed my life. If some of you have read the autobiography of a yogi, Lahiri Mahashaya, who's the first person who actually gets taught Kriya Yoga by Mahavtar Babaji, the cave in which he actually initiated Lahiri Mahashaya is in the Himalayas, outside Ranikhet, a few hours drive. I've been in that cave and sat and meditated many times. This is real. This is real. Prarabdha is real. Past life karma is real. Reincarnation is real. So I'm answering different master. All the rewards are not to be obtained right now in this life. Even so, even though I'm doing Kriya Yoga, I also believe that Karma Yoga is important. My life really has been about Karma Yoga and Jnana Yoga. I'm still on the path, increasingly in Bhakti Yoga as well. The last thing I would share with you is, if I have followed the path I'm on and I want to continue till the end of my days, this may seem a little strange to you. I actually do not let my life be governed too much by the judgments of other people about me. You have to follow a light within yourself. Anything you do, anything you say, even the words that I'm sharing with you right now. Within this audience, there may be some people who absolutely love it and some people who absolutely hate it. And I accept both. You have the right to feel the way you do. It is not going to change the path that I am on. That is between me and my God. That is between my Atma and the Paramatma, and I'm answerable to no one else. In many religions, this is blasphemy. In Islam, I would probably be killed for saying that. It is completely consistent with the deepest Hindu tradition. Ultimately, each one of our relationships is only to our God. Yes, we have all the duties that we have in the world around us, and yes, it behooves us to fulfill them as fully as we can, but we cannot get confused about what is the ultimate aim, which brings me to my final point. Where am I going now? Professionally, I would think, as I said, I'm going to Stanford starting January next year. I may spend a year, maybe 2 years. I'll get more involved in Silicon Valley. The CEO of Google, by the way, Sundar Pichai, is a former student of mine. I taught him at Wharton, and I taught him high technology entrepreneurship. And he's now the CEO of Google. His salary, I think, is $150 million a year. I'm going to see him next year and find out what he's up to. More and more, I have discovered, and please don't think of this as being arrogant, making money is actually quite easy, not complicated. You can do it, I can do it in so many different ways. I think what I'm really more interested in is, and this is why I'm going to Stanford, this is like one ashram has ended, I'm going to the next ashram now. It's a detaching from the world and sitting back and saying, how can I contribute best to the world now, given all the gifts that have been so kindly given to me by the world? And this, by the way, again, in the ancient Hindu spiritual tradition, those of you that know this work, this is what the ultimate journey is about. The ultimate journey, which is the path of Kriya Yoga as well, in the Shastras, it's called the journey to Kaivalya. That's what it's about. So, thank you very much. I hope I have not been too esoteric. We'll take a few questions.
I think if you have a question.
My name is Raghavendra Singh. I have a question for you. What excites you? You know, what basically you'll be very happy what's happened to you, then you'll be very excited, you know?
You know, is this still working? Yeah, it is. So I'm going to give you an answer which you may find very strange. And maybe this is the path of Kriya Yoga. Not too much excites me, actually. Not too much excites me on the positive side, and not too much excites me on the negative side. There is a Sanskrit word for it, Atma Prajna, I think, or Sthit Prajna. Sthit Prajna. I'm not saying I'm an enlightened master, I'm very far from it, but as you walk this path, you realize that there are higher things that are going on. When the mind is ready, when the soul is ready, when the heart is opened enough, your feelings actually change. So one of the very wonderful things that I've done, and if you haven't done it, I would strongly encourage you. 3 times I have read Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. In the Sanskrit, in the English translation, and then the commentaries. And the phenomenal thing about Patanjali's Yoga Sutras is, this is written, this is actually compiled. He didn't write them himself, he compiled them around, it's not clear, few hundred BC, few hundred AD, but they were already in existence, he just brought them together. Sankhalan kiya tha, collation. And he says, okay, oh, by the way, as you keep doing this practice, you will start to see that suddenly you will look at someone and you can tell what's going to happen in their future. And he says then, these are minor siddhis. Don't get caught up in them. This is a sideshow. Let it be. Just keep on your path. So what is very interesting is, in a very modest, minor manner, on the path that I'm on, I've started to see things. And I just try to do what Maharishi, Patanjali was a great Maharishi of his time, but he says, keep following the path, keep doing your Kriya Yoga, keep doing your action, keep doing your Karma Yoga, keep doing your Gyan Yoga, try to be a force for good, don't get caught up in this. So naturally, in fact, the excitement goes away. Equally, by the way, the disappointment goes away. You know, I was mentioning to Chandrabhushan and Kum, my mother, who will be 88 in December, she suddenly took ill. Of course, my nephew Girish is now back. Vinita is in ophthalmology at your old medical school. They took her to the hospital. She has diabetes, so she had some blood sugar complications. I'm sitting here in America. In fact, I was in Brazil a few days ago. I just came back 2 days back. And I thought to myself, you know, she may die. And truth be told, I want her to live as long as she can. I keep talking to her every day on Skype. And I think to myself, well, if it is her time, it's okay. It's okay, because we will meet again. And what's important is, I have done at every step of my life, all through, my dharma with her, as I did with my father, as I will continue to as long as she's alive. And we will do our best to keep her in good health. When it's her time, it's okay. I've even talked to her about this. And she says, it's fine, no problem. So, long answer, but I'm in a different place. Someone else?
I have one question.
Please.
It may be a dumb question. The question is, what is your goal of doing Kriya Yoga? And if you achieve a certain level, then how is it going to impact you? Probably it may affect your life, but how it may impact people's life?
So, it's not a dumb question at all. Frankly, I mentioned the word Kaivalya. And ultimately, in this old Hindu spiritual tradition, the journey that we are on ultimately is a solitary journey. This is not to say that we give up everything of the world and wander off into the mountains, which people do. There are people in the Himalayas, I have met some of them, who have just completely left the world. It does happen, by the way, this may seem strange, but that's the really excellent part of your question. If your consciousness takes you to a certain place, for some highly evolved people, they have nothing to say anymore. So they go away. They basically are in contemplation, and this is what moves them. To answer your question, what is my goal? It's not easy to answer. I had all kinds of goals as life goals 30, 40, even 50 years ago when I was a young child in India. The honest truth is, without sounding too arrogant or vain or full of myself, by God's great gifts to me, I have succeeded beyond my wildest expectations. Those goals simply don't matter anymore. Of course, I know that money, while it's not the most important thing, can buy you lots of comforts in life, a good life. I'd like to leave something for my children. If I think of goals that I have myself, there are 2 or 3 things I would say. One is, and this is the journey of Kriya Yoga, my ultimate commitment is to the evolution of my own consciousness and my own soul's journey, of which being a father, a brother, a son, a husband, this is only a part of the journey. There is a higher journey that's also going on. I'm keenly aware of that now. Beyond that, at another level, I would say my goal in life now is to simply to bring back to the world the gifts that have been given to me. Whether it is through words, whether it is through actions. I was very, very privileged in that I was able to help create some great institutions of learning, both in India and in Singapore. Indian School of Business, I was one of the 3 co-founders, not now, 20 years ago. And I just want to keep giving these gifts back. Money-wise, the truth is, God has been kind to us. I cannot spend the money that I have. There's no point in earning even more. I'm not opposed to it. If the opportunity presents itself, I was talking with one of you who is in the biosciences world. If the opportunity presents itself, and there are such opportunities, it may be possible actually to not only make tens of millions or hundreds of millions, but billions of dollars. If that happens, if that's where my karma yoga takes me, I'll go and do it. But the real issue will not be the making of hundreds of millions or billions of dollars. The real gift will be, think about bringing biosimilar drugs to the world of high quality at a low enough price that tens of millions of lives can be saved. That would be satisfying.
I'll start. So thank you so much for sharing some of your various experiences, and I think you would be best fit to answer this question I have for you.
Please.
So you originally talked about choice encounters, right? These could be
Chance encounters.
Sorry, chance encounters that could be turning points in your life.
Yes.
Right? So from your various experiences, can you think of similarities among those chance encounters? And can you think of how to recognize those chance encounters and how to capitalize on them? If based on those similarities. So if for us youngsters, if we're presented with those encounters, right, that randomly appear.
I know where you're going.
Okay.
It's a very good question, but if I may, remember that I have been this Ivy League professor for much of my life. So the privilege of answering the question is that you can always reinterpret the question. I'm going to do that. I think the more interesting part for your purposes is a slightly different question that I would ask. It's not similarities across these turning points. It's similarities in how do you respond to these once they occur. That's the key. That will determine what your actions will be. The turning points, as I said by definition, they come without rhyme or reason. You've just got to be on the road and things will happen. By the way, it cannot be, you can't be sitting inside your bedroom or your basement and playing computer games and think that things will happen to you. You have to be out. You have to be out on the playing field for lightning to strike you. That's a very important choice you have to make. That said, what I would tell you is that, and I have a lot of experience in China, so let me take an example from China. What's fascinating in China is that the character for opportunity is the same character for danger. The Chinese character is partly interpreted as opportunity, partly as danger. So one of the things about these turning points, and sometimes they appear very, very simply. You are at a dinner, at a party, standing next to someone and he or she asks you a question. It can be as simple as that. It doesn't come with a big flag saying, I'm an opportunity. Just something happens. And this again is deep in the heart of the Hindu spiritual tradition. The entire universe is there. So this is back in deepest Vedantic thinking, that there is a world in which we live, like right now. This is the manifest world. There is a latent world, which is always there. And this is, by the way, what Patanjali talks about in the Yoga Sutras. That which is real with a capital R is always there in the background. This is what Mr. Trivedi was telling me. Watch this closely. This is the deepest truth. This is a moment of virakti for you. And the curtains are parted and you will see the real for what it is. Sometimes you see this reality. And it's hard to describe, but with life experience, if you're fortunate enough, you will get to see it. The potential is there in every moment. The potential to do infinitely great things, both for yourself and the world, and infinitely abominable things, both for yourself and the world. Because it's the same world. It's this infinite potential. What you learn is how do you tap into that potential. Interestingly enough, some of the questions that were asked of me, so what are your goals now? What are you going to do? this model that I'm talking about actually implies a very different choice. It means doing nothing. It's what is called very alert waiting. Just be ready. Just be ready. And when the unique gifts to bring to the world, do you have the courage to put aside all those cacophony of voices and judgments you hear from the outside and trust that which is within you? That's the ultimate path. If you learn to trust that, things will happen. Put one foot in front of the other. Keep on 5 years, 10 years, 30 years. In my case, this is a journey that's coming to close to 50 years now, right? Things will happen. And remember, as long as you believe this I will tell you because I genuinely believe this, anything that you truly desire, you can make it happen. But you have to believe that it's possible. You have to believe that it's possible and that you have what it takes to make it happen within you. If you don't believe it, it's never going to happen. If you dare to dream, it may happen. That's the difference.
And we're going to take our last question.
Last question, and then I need to run to my car and go back to Philadelphia. My sincere apologies. Yes, please.
My question, in your speech and in your talk, you said that you study a lot of Indian philosophy, Patanjali, and Veda and all, maybe.
Yes.
So my question is that God has given all bad and good to us. He has given egos and jealousy to us.
Yes.
How we can, in your experience and in your study, how you can tell us that we can reduce that magnitude of the egos and jealousy?
This is a difficult question, but let me try to give you the best answer I can, which is from another of those wonderful chance encounters that I had when I was at Stanford. Mukesh Ambani was a first-year MBA. So was this young man who has gone on to become one of my best friends. And in fact, tomorrow night I'm taking a plane. I'm going to meet him day after tomorrow in Bombay. His name is Akhil Gupta. And Akhil, if you look at Reliance Industries, until the early 1990s, Reliance was only doing petrochemicals. There was Vimal textiles, polyester, suiting, etc. That's all they were doing. They were a petrochemicals company. Even in business jargon, we call it only a part of the value chain. In the early 1990s, they diversified into a lot of different things, including building what is today the world's largest petrochemicals refinery in Jamnagar, in Gujarat. The person who did all that diversification work was this best friend of mine. He was best friends with Mukesh. He was living in Seawind in Colaba. Dhirubhai Ambani was very fond of him. And I got to be friends with them over the years for that reason. One day I was complaining to my friend Akhil about something. By the way, he retired 2 years ago. He was chairman of Blackstone, the private equity firm for India. And he retired in December 2014. He has just finished 2 years at Harvard doing a similar thing that I will be doing at Stanford next year. So Akhil says to me, I was complaining about it, this guy is so corrupt, I can't deal with him. He's a very dear friend of mine. He says, JV, I'm going to speak in Hindi and English here. Hamari tumhari ek hi problem hai. He calls me JV from the old days. I said, you and I, he says, we have the same, we have one problem. I said, what is it? So he says, we make the mistake of thinking the guy who is sitting in front of the table, across the table from us, is just like us. You're a high integrity, transparent, honest person. I think I'm like that as well. This is a great mistake. By the way, he lived with Reliance all these years, did all their work, and yet he was offered this job after a 1.5 year due diligence by Steve Schwarzman in New York. He's a multi-billionaire. And nothing about Reliance and all the news that keeps floating around ever touched him. This is a bit like the Ramayana analogy is Lanka mein Vibhishan, right? He was untouched by everything. He was offered this job. So what does he say? So I said, Akhil, so what should we do? He says, JV, you have to understand the world is a jungle, right? This is the Buddhist notion and the Hindu notion of sansar as well. There's all kinds of good and evil. In the jungle, he says, there are all kinds of animals. There are horses, there are elephants, there are alligators, there are lions, there are tigers, there are dogs, there are cats, there are jackals, there are snakes, there are scorpions, right? So he says, the task that we have, there's no point berating them, how can this be, why is this guy a snake? He's a snake, what can he do? You have to recognize who is it that you're dealing with. If you're dealing with a dog, he's going to be loyal like a dog, right? If you're dealing with a horse, he's going to be a horse. If you're dealing with a scorpion, he can say whatever he wants, he's going to sting you. If you're dealing with a snake, he's going to bite you. Be prepared. You have no choice, you have to deal with these people. They're there. By the way, this is particularly true of positions of leadership. You cannot choose. There will be thousands of people around you, and it will be like the jungle. You know what I'm talking about. Everyone who has served in a senior leadership position, whether in government or in industry or in the armed forces or in education, it's the same all over the world. There are all kinds of people. You have to learn to look beyond and see what is not being presented to you. This is, by the way, old philosophical tradition in the Hindu tradition called Sankhya. The truth, this is very deep actually, very deep. The truth in Sankhya is defined not by this is true. It is defined by this is true and this is untrue. The two together define what is the truth. Ya satya hai, ya asatya hai. So, this is a microphone, but it is not a car. To give you an absurd example. It's a different view of the truth. So you have to learn to live in the world, and you have to know what is the animal that you're dealing with. That's the best I can say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hello? Hello?
Thank you so much, Dr. Singh.
Sure, sure. Sure.
That was amazing, Dr. Singh. Let's give him a big round of applause, please. The time just flew by. I mean, we started at 3 and here we are. It's 3:30. It's unbelievable. And I'm sure we could have sat here for another couple of hours. It's just amazing, inspirational, motivational. Thank you so much for your time. We're honored. And on behalf of Rana, we'd like to present you with this.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Here, take a picture.
Get a little bit closer, please. Here we go. Hold on, buddy. Okay. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. I'll take your leave.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you very much.
I feel so bad. I wish the Rana youth were here. I mean, you're a professor.
You can tell me about. Tell them about it.
Oh,
Thank you so
no.
much.